When I discovered those suspicious financial transactions at the company of Richard Caldwell, my boss, I felt a chill down my spine. Working as a financial analyst, I was used to dealing with numbers and spreadsheets every day, but this was different. There was something very wrong there. At first, I thought it could be an error, some accounting discrepancy. However, the more I investigated, the more it became clear that this was something much bigger and more sinister. One night, after an exhausting day at the office, I invited Kyle Thompson, my longtime friend and talented hacker, out for coffee. I needed to share my discovery with someone I trusted blindly. Sitting in a discreet cafe downtown, I glanced at Kyle, who seemed intrigued by my urgency. "Kyle, I found something very serious in the company's financial records," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Transactions that don't make sense, money going to unknown accounts. I think Caldwell is involved in a multimillion-dollar fraud scheme." Kyle frowned and leaned forward, as if to make sure no one else could hear our conversation. "Emily, are you sure?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "This is very serious. If I'm right, we're talking about a large-scale crime." I nodded, showing him some documents I secretly printed from the company system. "I know. And that's why I need your help. Can you help me hack these accounts and find out where this money is going?" Kyle was silent for a moment, analyzing the papers. Finally, he nodded in agreement. "Right, I'm with you. Let's find out what's going on." Over the next few days, we both worked tirelessly. I spent hours reviewing financial records, while Kyle used his skills to hack systems and track transactions. It was meticulous and dangerous work, but I knew I couldn't stop. Each new discovery led us to believe even more that we were stirring a hornet's nest. One night, after a significant breakthrough, Kyle showed up at my house with a serious expression. "Emily, I found something," he said, handing me a flash drive. "These transactions lead to anonymous accounts in tax havens. And there's more, some of these accounts are linked to high-ranking political figures." My eyes widened with surprise and worry. "This is much bigger than we thought," I murmured, feeling the weight of the situation increasing. "We need to be extremely careful." Kyle agreed, but he couldn't hide the anxiety on his face. "We have to plan our next steps carefully. If they find out we're investigating, our lives could be in danger." From that moment on, every move we made was calculated. We knew we were dealing with powerful and unscrupulous people. I started pretending nothing was happening at work, maintaining my normal routine while, inside, every cell in my body was on high alert. One particularly tense afternoon, as I was reviewing yet another batch of documents, I received a text from Kyle. "We need to talk. Urgent." My heart raced. I met with him in a remote park, where he informed me that he had been hacked by someone extremely skilled. "Emily, we're being watched," he said, his voice thick with concern. "Someone is aware of our investigations and is trying to stop us." I swallowed hard, feeling panic starting to set in. "What do we do now, Kyle?" He looked me in the eyes, his determination returning. "We continue. But we need to be even more careful and faster. We have to gather all the evidence before they catch us." And so, with danger hanging over our heads, we continue our search for justice. Each day was a race against time. Each new discovery brought us closer to the truth, but also to the imminent risk. I knew we were risking everything, but there was no turning back. We needed to expose Richard Caldwell and everyone involved, no matter what the cost. I never imagined that my life would take such a dangerous and uncertain turn. It all started with a series of suspicious financial transactions that I found at the company of Richard Caldwell, my boss. Every number I analyzed seemed to tell a dark story of schemes and fraud. I shared my findings with Kyle Thompson, my longtime friend and a skilled hacker. He agreed to help me, and together we began to gather evidence of the multimillion-dollar fraud. "Emily, are you sure you want to go through with this?" Kyle asked one night as he set up his laptop on my dining room table. "If we get caught, it could end our lives." "I know, Kyle," I replied, trying to hide the fear in my voice. "But I can't just ignore what I discovered." People are being harmed. We need to do something. And so, we tirelessly dedicate ourselves to research. However, we soon encountered an unexpected obstacle. Some of the transactions led to anonymous accounts in tax havens. It was impossible to track the recipients without hacking these accounts, an extremely risky but necessary step. "We're going to have to hack these accounts," Kyle said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "But it will attract unwanted attention." "We have no choice," I replied. "If we don't find out who's behind this, we'll never get enough evidence." With a heavy sigh, Kyle got to work. We spent hours in front of the computer, deciphering codes and breaking security barriers. Finally, we were able to access some of the accounts, revealing an even more complex web of corruption. But we soon realized that we had attracted someone's attention. A mysterious man started following us. I noticed its presence on every corner, getting closer and closer. "Emily, I think we're being followed," Kyle said, discreetly looking out the window of the cafe where we were. "That man in the gray suit. I've seen him 3 times today." "Are you sure?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Yes, and it's no coincidence. We need to be more careful." From that moment on, every step we took was calculated with precision. However, my confidence was deeply shaken when I began to suspect that Mark Davis, my mentor and someone I had always trusted, might be involved in the scheme. "Mark, I need to talk to you," he said, trying to remain calm as he walked into his office. "Of course, Emily." "What happened?" he replied, with a smile that now seemed suspicious. I found some things that don't make sense. And some transactions, they lead to you." Mark's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of surprise and concern. "Emily, are you insinuating that I'm involved in something illegal?" "I don't know, Mark. I just need to understand what's going on. Emily, you know me. You know I've always been honest with you. Please trust me." I left Mark's office with a heavy heart, not knowing who to trust. Suspicion gnawed at my mind, but I couldn't let it distract me. We had a bigger goal. As we continued to investigate, the mysterious man's presence became almost suffocating. He seemed to always be one step ahead, watching us closely. Every wrong move could be fatal, and the pressure was almost unbearable. "Kyle, we need to find a way to lose him," I said, my voice thick with urgency. "I'm working on it, Emily. But he's good. Really good." The tension between us only increased, especially with the possibility that someone so close to me was involved in the scheme. Mark has always been my guide, my mentor. The idea that he might be betraying my trust was devastating. "We need to keep going, Emily," Kyle insisted. "We can't let them intimidate us." "I know, Kyle. But I don't know how much longer I can take this." Despite the fear and uncertainty, we continue our search for the truth, navigating a maze of lies and betrayals. Each new discovery brought us closer to justice, but it also increased the risk we were taking. I knew we were playing a dangerous game, and that every wrong move could be our last. But we couldn't stop. Not until the truth was revealed and the guilty paid for their crimes. When Kyle and I's relationship began to unravel, the tension in the air was palpable. I remember one particular night we were in Kyle's small apartment, surrounded by glowing monitors and cables strewn across the floor. The clock was already past 2 in the morning, but the adrenaline kept us awake. "Emily, don't you think we're going too far?" Kyle asked, his brown eyes fixed on me as he typed furiously on his laptop. I knew he was worried, but I also knew we couldn't stop. "Kyle, if we don't do this, who will? We need more proof before we take this to the authorities." "Caldwell can't get away with it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was beating fast. He stopped typing and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I know, Emily, but every day that passes, we put our lives at greater risk. And these threats you're receiving, this isn't a game." I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. The anonymous threats started arriving a few weeks ago, dark and frightening messages that made me look over my shoulder constantly. "I know, Kyle. But I can't back down now," We need help." With that in mind, I decided to reach out to Laura Bennett, an investigative journalist whose career was in decline. I met her at a cafe in the city center. Laura was a middle-aged woman, with tired eyes but still full of determination. "Emily Brooks?" she asked, holding out her hand. "Yes, it's me." "Thank you for finding me on such short notice," I replied, shaking her hand. We sat at a table away, where I explained everything to her, from the frauds to the threats. Laura listened attentively, writing down every detail in her notebook. "This is huge, Emily. If it's true, it could be the story I need to redeem myself." "But do you realize the danger you're putting yourself in?" she asked, her eyes fixed on mine. "I do, Laura. But I can't do it alone. I need your experience and your connections," I replied, hoping she would understand the urgency of the situation. Laura nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in. But we need to be careful. Caldwell has a lot of power and won't give up easily." With Laura on board, we began working together. She used her sources to get more information, while Kyle and I continued to hack into Caldwell's systems. During this time, the tension between Kyle and I only increased. One night, after a long work session, Kyle and I found ourselves alone in the apartment. The silence was almost unbearable. Finally, he broke the ice. "Emily, we need to talk about what's going on between us," he said, his voice low and serious. I swallowed hard, feeling my heart speed up. "I know, Kyle. I feel like everything is so confusing right now." He came closer, taking my hand. "Emily, I care about you a lot. And I'm not just speaking as a friend. But this whole situation is wearing on us. We need to be honest with each other." I took a deep breath, feeling the tears start to form. "Kyle, I care about you too. More than I want to admit. But right now, I don't know if I can handle these emotions and this mission at the same time." Kyle pulled me into a tight hug. "We'll get through this together, Emily. One step at a time." That moment brought a little relief, but we knew there was still a long way to go. The threats continued, and the pressure increased every day. But with Laura on our side, we felt we had a real chance to expose Caldwell and bring justice. The network of corruption we were trying to dismantle was vast and dangerous, but I was determined to move forward, no matter how complicated or risky the situation became. Every day was a new battle, but with Kyle and Laura by my side, I believed we could win this war. With Laura's help, Emily and Kyle got more evidence, but the siege was closing quickly. The mysterious man, whose presence was already a constant, intensified the pursuit, and I could feel the danger getting closer every day. The tension was palpable, and I knew I needed to act before it was too late. One night, while reviewing some of the evidence we had collected, my cell phone vibrated with a message. It was Laura. "Emily, we need to meet. I have something important." The urgency in the message was clear. I arranged to meet Laura at a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived at the location, Laura was already there, leafing through some notes. "Laura, what happened?" I asked, trying to remain calm despite my growing nervousness. "Emily, I just published a preliminary story on the Caldwell scheme," she said bluntly. "We need to put pressure on them, and this was the best way I could find." "You did what?" I exclaimed, surprised and a little scared. "That'll put them even more on top of us." Laura sighed, understanding my concern. "I know, Emily. But it will also draw the attention of authorities and the public. We will expose Caldwell and his accomplices, but we need to be prepared for the consequences." As I processed the information, Kyle walked into the cafe, looking just as worried as I felt. "Emily, Laura, we have a problem. The mystery man is intensifying his pursuit. I saw him near my apartment last night." My heart accelerated. "Kyle, we need to get out of here now." We decided that the best option would be to temporarily hide in a motel outside of town. As we drove, the tension in the car was palpable. "Laura, do you think the article will have any effect?" I asked, trying to think of anything that could give us an advantage. Yes, she replied with conviction. But we also need a plan B. We need more proof, something that is definitive. What are you thinking about? Kyle asked, ever the strategist. We need to hack Caldwell's internal system and get the final documents, Laura continued. Only then can we ensure that he has no way of escaping. As we were discussing strategy, my phone rang. It was an anonymous message. You can't hide forever, Emily. He knows where we are, I muttered, showing the message to the others. We need to be quick. We arrived at the motel and locked ourselves in one of the rooms. Kyle set up his computer and started working on the hack. Laura and I reviewed the evidence we already had, trying to find any loopholes that could give us an advantage. Hours passed in tense silence, interrupted only by the sound of keyboards and occasional murmurs. Suddenly, Kyle exclaimed, I did it. I'm inside Caldwell's system. Great work, Kyle, Laura said, moving closer to see the screen. Now we need to find the documents that link Caldwell directly to the scheme. As Kyle navigated the system, I couldn't help but think about how drastically my life had changed in the last few weeks. The constant fear, the feeling of being hunted, but there was also a growing determination. I couldn't let Caldwell get away with it. Finally, Kyle found what we were looking for. Here it is. Wire transfers, forged contracts, everything. That's enough to knock him out, Laura said, relieved. But before we could celebrate, we heard a noise outside. I looked out the window and saw the mysterious man approaching. He's here, I whispered, panic rising. We need to leave now, Kyle said, already starting to unplug his equipment. Laura took the evidence and we headed out the back door. Our hearts were pounding as we ran to the car. We barely managed to escape, but we knew time was running out. Where to now? I asked, trying to remain calm. Let's go to the police station, said Laura. We have what we need. It's time to get the authorities involved. As we drove to the police station, with the mystery man still on our trail, I knew we were entering the final phase of our mission. The danger was real, but justice was within our reach. And as scary as it was, I was determined to see it through to the end. Discovering that the corruption network extended beyond Caldwell's company was a shock. Kyle, Laura, and I were sitting in the small apartment that served as our makeshift headquarters, surrounded by papers, laptops, and empty coffee cups. The tension in the air was palpable. This can't be real, I muttered, looking at Kyle's laptop screen. We are talking about a corruption network that involves high-ranking politicians. This is much bigger than we thought. Kyle, with a serious expression and eyes fixed on the monitor, nodded. I know, Emily. But the proof is all here. Financial transactions, emails, everything leads to these names. We are dealing with something huge. Laura, who was scrolling through her cell phone, raised her head. This could be the stuff of my life. But it can also put us in even greater danger. We need to be careful. The decision to expose the entire corruption network was not easy. We knew this could put us at even greater risk, but we couldn't just ignore what we had discovered. We had to ensure justice was served, even if it meant risking our lives. We need to gather more evidence and make sure it is irrefutable, I declared, trying to remain calm. And we also need a strategy to protect ourselves. Kyle agreed. I'll continue investigating these accounts and see if I can find any more compromising details. Laura, can you use your connections to get more information about these politicians? Of course, I'll see what I can do, replied Laura, already typing on her cell phone. As we worked frantically, a sense of desperation began to creep in. With each new piece of information revealed, the corruption network seemed to expand even further. And the pressure increased, especially when I started receiving threatening messages. They weren't direct, but enough to keep me on my toes. One night, after hours of research, Kyle and I were alone in the apartment. He looked at me with a worried expression. Emily, are you okay? He asked, in a soft voice. I sighed. I don't know, Kyle. This is all too much. And now to find out that my mentor, Mark, is involved. It destroyed me. I know it's hard, he said, moving closer and placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. But we need to continue. And you are not alone in this. I looked into his eyes and realized how much he cared. There was something more there, something I wasn't ready to face at that moment. Thanks, Kyle, I murmured. I really appreciate your help and your friendship. He smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I will always be here for you, Emily. The next morning, Laura arrived with worrying news. I got some information, but it looks like we're being watched. We need to be even more cautious. This just confirms that we're on the right path, I replied, trying to sound confident. Let's continue. The situation became even more complicated when Mark Davis, my mentor, revealed himself as one of the main organizers of the scheme. I couldn't believe it when I saw your name linked to the transactions. Mark, how could you do that? I asked, my voice shaking, when I finally confronted him. He tried to justify it. Emily, you don't understand. I had no choice. Caldwell forced me. If I didn't cooperate, he would destroy my life. That doesn't justify your actions, I replied. You betrayed my trust and that of so many other people. I know, and I'm sorry, he said, with a dejected look. But now we need to work together to take down Caldwell and the others. I can help you. Despite the betrayal, I realized that Mark could still be useful. We decided to accept your help, but with caution. The network of corruption we uncovered was vast and powerful, and we needed every possible alliance to ensure justice prevailed. From that moment on, we were all at risk, but also more determined than ever to expose the whole truth. The battle was just beginning, and we could not afford to fail. I remember the exact moment I decided to confront Mark about his involvement in the fraud scheme. The storm that was brewing inside me was reflected in my eyes, as I approached his room with firm steps and a racing heart. As soon as I entered, Mark looked up from his papers, a look of surprise forming on his face. He wasn't expecting a visitor. Emily, what's wrong? You look distraught, he said, trying to maintain his composure. Disturbed? That's an understatement, Mark. I replied, my voice thick with indignation. I know about you. I know you're involved in Caldwell's scheme. Mark frowned, his gaze becoming more defensive. What are you talking about, Emily? That's a very serious accusation. I threw a sheaf of papers onto his desk, containing all the evidence Kyle and I had gathered. Here are the transactions, the deposits into anonymous accounts. It all leads to you, Mark. How could you do this? I trusted you. He took the papers with shaking hands, his eyes flicking over the evidence. Emily, you don't understand. I'm doing this for the greater good. Caldwell has powerful connections, and if we don't cooperate, we will be crushed. A lot bigger? I almost shouted. Is defrauding millions of dollars for the greater good? How many lives were ruined because of it? How many people lost everything while you lined your pockets? Mark sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. Caldwell has secrets about me, things from my past that he threatened to reveal if I didn't help him. I had no choice. We all have choices, Mark. What you did was betray everyone around you, including me. I felt tears start to form, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. I will expose all of this, and you will pay for your actions. Before he could respond, my phone rang. It was a message from Kyle. When I opened it, my heart stopped for a moment. Emily, I need help. I'm being followed. I think it's the mystery man. I'm at the abandoned warehouse on 5th Avenue. I have to go, I said, turning to leave. Emily, wait. Mark called, but I was already running down the hall. I arrived at the warehouse in minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The place was deserted and dark, only the distant sound of drips broke the silence. Kyle. I called, my voice echoing off the empty walls. Emily, I'm here, he replied, his voice weak. I ran towards the sound and found him tied to a chair, with a deep cut on his forehead. Kyle, my God, what happened? It was the mystery man. He took me by surprise. He said he worked for Caldwell and that if you didn't stop investigating, we would both be killed. I started to loosen his bonds, my hands shaking. We'll get out of this, Kyle. I promise. Before I could finish, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the mysterious man. It seems you decided not to listen to the warnings, Emily, he said, his voice cold and calculating. Who are you? I asked, trying to hide the fear in my voice. Martin Hayes, former government agent. Now working for Caldwell. And you, Emily, are in serious trouble. Why are you doing this? I asked, trying to stall for time. Money, power. The reasons are always the same, he replied with a sinister smile. But now, you will come with me. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the warehouse, and Hayes fell to the floor, unconscious. I looked back and saw Mark, holding a piece of wood. Let's get out of here, quick, he said. We have to get Kyle somewhere safe. Despite everything, I knew that fight was far from over. But at that moment, the most important thing was to save Kyle and find a way to take Caldwell down once and for all. Mark's betrayal still hurt, but his unexpected help gave me new hope that maybe, just maybe, we could get out of this alive and get justice. With Kyle in danger, the sense of urgency was palpable. Laura and I knew we didn't have much time. Every second that passed could be Kyle's last, and the pressure to find him was overwhelming. I was in my apartment, surrounded by computer screens, while Laura, on the phone, activated all her journalistic connections to track down Martin Hayes, the mysterious man who had kidnapped Kyle. I managed to speak to a source at the FBI, Laura said, her voice full of tension. They have some leads on Hayes' location. It appears he has a hideout in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. That is great. I replied, trying to remain optimistic. I'm going to continue trying to hack Caldwell Corp's security systems. If we can access the security cameras, perhaps we can confirm Kyle's whereabouts. As Laura continued to make calls, I focused on the screen in front of me. Every line of code he typed was a desperate attempt to break through the layers of security that Richard Caldwell had implemented. I knew he didn't make things easy, but I couldn't give up. Emily, you have to be quick, Laura insisted. We don't know how long Kyle has. I know, I replied, feeling the pressure build. I am doing my best. After several failed attempts, I finally managed to access one of the security cameras. The image was grainy, but I could see a small, dark room with Kyle tied to a chair. He looked injured, but he was alive. Laura, I found him. I exclaimed, trying to contain my excitement. He's in a warehouse. The coordinates are here. Laura quickly wrote down the information. Great work, Emily. Now we need a plan to rescue him. As we discussed the possibilities, it became clear that we couldn't do this alone. We needed help, and fast. Laura used her connections to gain the support of some ex-soldiers who owed her favors. They agreed to meet us at the warehouse. We arrived at the place in the middle of the night. The air was cold and heavy, and the darkness around us felt even more oppressive. Laura and I exchanged a determined look before approaching the warehouse. The ex-soldiers were ready, with equipment and weapons, waiting for our signal. We're here to get Kyle and get out as quickly as possible, Laura whispered to the team. No heroes today. Understood? Everyone nodded, and we began to move silently through the warehouse. I was focused, each step calculated to avoid making noise. Finally, we reached the room where Kyle was being kept. Martin Hayes was there, watching Kyle with a cold, calculating expression. We didn't have much time. Laura signaled, and the ex-military men entered the room, taking Hayes by surprise. Release him now, one of the soldiers ordered, pointing the gun at Hayes. Hayes hesitated for a moment, but he knew he was at a disadvantage. He raised his hands in surrender as one of the soldiers approached Kyle to untie him. Emily. Kyle murmured, his voice weak but filled with relief. I'm here, I replied, running over to him. You're safe now. As the military took Hayes into custody, Laura and I helped Kyle to his feet. He was weak, but determined to get out of there. We were lucky this time, Laura said, relieved. But we still have a lot of work to do. We'll make sure Caldwell pays for this, I replied, my determination renewed. And we will expose the entire network of corruption. We cannot stop now. With Kyle safe, we knew we had a chance to finally take down Richard Caldwell and everyone involved. It was our chance to get justice and make sure no one else had to go through what we did. And together, we were ready to face any challenge that came our way. When we finally located where Kyle was being held, a mixture of relief and apprehension washed over me. Laura and I were in the car, parked a few blocks away from the abandoned warehouse where Kyle was being held. The plan was dangerous, but there was no other option. Emily, are you sure you want to do this? Laura asked, her eyes fixed on her laptop screens, monitoring the security systems I had hacked. We have no choice, Laura. Kyle is in there and we need to get him out before something worse happens, I replied firmly, even though my heart was racing. Laura nodded, but not before casting a worried look in my direction. Okay, let's do this. We approached the warehouse silently, adrenaline coursing through our veins. I had managed to temporarily disable the security cameras, but we knew time was against us. Every second counted. Ready? Laura whispered as we positioned ourselves near a side entrance. Yeah, let's go, I replied, taking a deep breath. We managed to get in without making any noise, but the tension in the air was palpable. We walked through the dark corridors, guided only by the dim light of our flashlights. When we approached a locked room, my heart almost stopped. I could hear voices coming from inside and I recognized one of them immediately. It was Kyle. I'm going to open the door. Be ready, I murmured to Laura, who nodded and held tight to a small gun she had brought for our defense. With a quick movement, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside the room, Kyle was tied to a chair, with a bruised face, visibly suffering. Two armed men were at his side, but the surprise on their faces gave us the advantage. Release him now! Laura shouted, pointing the gun at the men. Before they could react, I struck with the baton I had hidden in my jacket, knocking one of them down. Laura fired a warning shot, making the other retreat. Emily, you did it. Kyle murmured, his voice weak but relieved. Let's get you out of here, I said, starting to untie him. However, our momentary victory was interrupted by a shocking revelation. Richard Caldwell appeared in the doorway, grinning malevolently. You think you can beat me? You're just pawns in this game, he said, his voice icy. Before he could react, another man entered the room. It was Mark Davis. My feelings were mixed, but I knew I needed to act fast. Mark, listen. I know what Caldwell did to you. He was manipulating you the whole time, forcing you to participate in this scheme. He threatened to reveal your past secrets, I said, trying to appeal to Mark's humanity. Mark hesitated, looking at Caldwell and then at me. Emily, I didn't want things to come to this. Shut up, Davis, Caldwell growled. She's just trying to confuse you. No, Mark, it's the truth. You can still do the right thing. Help us take down Caldwell, I insisted. Mark looked deeply into my eyes, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Then, he turned to Caldwell, his face hardening. That's enough, Richard. It's over. With surprising agility, Mark disarmed Caldwell and pinned him down. Laura, Kyle, and I watched, almost in disbelief. Let's get out of here before anyone else shows up, Mark said, his voice firm. We left the warehouse in tense silence, but there was a new understanding between us. Mark had redeemed himself, and with his help, we had a real chance of exposing the entire network of corruption. As we drove away, I felt a surge of hope. There was still much to be done, but for the first time, it seemed that justice might prevail. Thanks, Mark, I murmured, sincerely grateful. He just nodded, a look of determination on his face. Let's end this once and for all. And so, with Kyle safe and new alliances formed, we moved on to the next phase of our plan, ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. With Mark's help, Emily and Laura managed to rescue Kyle and obtain the final evidence needed to expose the entire network of corruption. However, Caldwell and Hayes are still at large and determined to silence them. Emily makes a deal with the police, offering the evidence in exchange for protection. Caldwell, feeling trapped, tries to flee the country. I was exhausted, but I couldn't afford to stop. After managing to rescue Kyle with some unexpected help from Mark, we knew we had little time left. Caldwell and Hayes would not give up easily. Kyle, Laura, and I sat in a small rented apartment, our faces lit only by the glow of laptops as we plotted our next move. "We have to hand this evidence over to the police now," Laura said, her voice firm despite her obvious fatigue. "Caldwell is desperate, he's going to try to escape." "I know," I replied, biting my lower lip. "But we need a solid agreement to guarantee our protection. We can't hand everything over on a plate and expect them to be on our side." Kyle, still with visible marks from his kidnapping, looked at me with concern. Are you sure we can trust them? What if Caldwell has someone on the inside?" "It's a risk we have to take," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We have no other option." We decided that Laura and I would go to the central police station, while Kyle would stay in the apartment, protected by Mark. Mark's presence was a strange relief. Despite everything, he was on our side now, and I genuinely believed he wanted to do the right thing. On the way to the police station, Laura and I discussed our strategy. "Let's go straight to Captain Reynolds," said Laura. "He is known for being incorruptible. If anyone can guarantee us protection, it's him." We arrived at the police station and were taken directly to the captain's office. The tension in the air was palpable. I was holding the folder with the exams so tight that my knuckles were white. "Captain Reynolds, thank you for having us," Laura began, with the authority of a seasoned journalist. "We have evidence of a corruption scheme involving Richard Caldwell and high-ranking political figures." Reynolds looked at us with a serious but curious expression. "Evidence, you say? This is a very serious accusation. Do you realize what you are asserting here?" "Yes, sir," I said, opening the folder and handing over the documents. "Here are the financial transactions, the emails, everything. Caldwell is trying to flee the country. We need protection in exchange for this evidence." The captain leafed through the papers, his expression becoming even more serious with each page. "This is very serious. I'm going to need the time necessary to check all of this out. In return, you have my word that you will have protection." "We don't have time, Captain," I insisted. "Caldwell could be on the run right now. We need to act quickly." He nodded, standing up. "I will mobilize a team. You two stay here until we have secured your safety." Laura and I exchanged a look of relief mixed with concern. We were closer than ever to exposing the entire network of corruption, but Caldwell and Hayes were still at large. Back at the apartment, Kyle and Mark were on high alert. "And then," asked Kyle as soon as we entered, "did we get protection?" "Yes," I replied, hugging him. "Captain Reynolds is checking the evidence and will mobilize a team." Mark nodded, but his expression was grim. "This is not the end, Emily. Caldwell will do anything to escape." I knew he was right. Caldwell was not the type of man who gave up easily. While we waited to hear from the police, we prepared a contingency plan. We needed to be ready for anything. Hours later, we received a call from Captain Reynolds. "We have a warrant for Caldwell's arrest. He's trying to escape through the international airport. My team is on the way." "Come on," said Mark, reaching for his gun. "We'll make sure he doesn't escape." We drove to the airport, our hearts beating fast. When we arrived, we saw Captain Reynolds' team surrounding Caldwell. He was about to board a private jet. "Richard Caldwell, you are under arrest," shouted one of the officers, as Caldwell raised his hands, a look of defeat on his face. As he was handcuffed, I felt a wave of relief mixed with a strange sense of emptiness. We had done it. justice would finally be served. But at the same time, I knew our lives would never be the same. Finally, with Caldwell captured and the evidence turned over, we could breathe a little easier. The battle had been long and arduous, but we had won. Corruption had been exposed, and justice would prevail. In the last confrontation, I had my heart in my mouth. The tension was palpable as we prepared for what could be the defining moment of our lives. Mark, who had recently redeemed himself by turning on Richard Caldwell, was at our side, ready to face the consequences of his past actions. I knew we were dealing with dangerous forces and that any mistake could be fatal. "Emily, are you sure about this?" Kyle asked, his voice thick with concern. He was exhausted, but determined to see it all through to the end. "We have no choice, Kyle. We need to do this now, before it's too late," I replied, trying to convey a confidence that I wasn't fully feeling myself. Laura was on the phone, finalizing the last details with the police. "They're on their way. We should meet them in 15 minutes, she informed him, then hung up. "We need to hurry." Mark looked at us with a dark expression. "I'm going to stay behind and hold things down here. You three need to get out of this alive." "No, Mark. We can't leave you here." "Let's all go together," I protested, but he shook his head. "Emily, I've done a lot of things wrong. This is something I can do right. Trust me," he said, with a determination that left no room for argument. Reluctantly, I agreed. "All right, but please be careful." Kyle, Laura, and I started moving toward the exit, but not before Mark gave us one last piece of advice. "Remember, Caldwell will fight to the end. Don't underestimate what he can do." As we ran through the hallways, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. We knew we didn't have much time. When we finally reached the meeting point with the police, we heard gunshots coming from where we left Mark. My heart stopped for a second, but we knew continuing was the only option. "Come on, we have to get out of here now," Kyle shouted, pulling me forward. Once outside the building, we met the police officers who quickly escorted us to safety. Caldwell was finally captured while trying to escape, and before long, his trial began. It was surreal to watch as all of his actions were exposed. Witnessing the crumbling of his corrupt empire was a mix of relief and sadness, especially when remembering Mark's sacrifice. The big plot twist came when we discovered the true identity of Martin Hayes. During the trial, it was revealed that he was, in fact, a double agent working to expose Caldwell from within the system. He approached us initially as a threat, but in the end, his goal was always to bring justice. "I never thought he was on our side," I admitted to Kyle as we watched the trial. "He played his role well," Kyle replied thoughtfully. "But the important thing is that justice was done." With Caldwell arrested and his actions exposed, a new era began. Laura managed to recover her journalistic career, publishing a series of articles that detailed the entire corruption network. The recognition she always deserved has finally arrived, and I couldn't be happier for her. As for Kyle and I, our unresolved feelings finally found a way. The closeness and danger we faced together strengthened our bond. We decided to give what we were feeling a chance, and it brought new strength to our relationship. One day, while we were at a cafe, I received an unexpected call. It was an offer to lead a financial investigation team. "Emily, we saw what you did and would like you to lead a new investigations unit. We need someone with your courage and integrity." I looked at Kyle, who smiled back. "Will you accept?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, with a smile. I think it's time for a fresh start. Justice prevailed, and I felt like we were finally free to move forward, stronger and more united than ever before.